No one in the kingdom of Valethorn had ever survived the curse of the Hollow Throne, until a maid with no magic and no name worth speaking tried to heal the man who had thrown her out. Lyanna felt it before she saw it. The pulse of it, like a second heartbeat, pressed beneath her sternum, insistent and low. She was on her knees scrubbing the corridor outside the eastern hall when the sensation rolled through her. Not pain, not pleasure, but something ancient that recognized her even when nothing else in the castle did. She pressed her palm flat against the cold stone floor and breathed. She had learned to breathe through it. She had spent 3 years learning how. The castle was loud with whispers that morning. The Alpha King was declining. She heard it from the cook, from the laundry women, from the old physician who walked past her with his black bag and his useless instruments and did not look at her once. The curse of the Hollow Throne had taken Aldrich's ability to shift. Then it had taken his warmth. Now, by every account that filtered down to the servant quarters, it was taking his voice, and after the voice would come the rest of him, piece by piece, until the most powerful alpha in the known packs was nothing but a silhouette in a chair. Lyanna wrung her cloth over the bucket. The water turned gray. She was not supposed to care. She had spent considerable energy constructing her not caring, building it into something load-bearing. She had a room now, a small one in the East Servants' Wing, and a job that did not require her to go above the 3rd floor, and a quiet life that cost her nothing except the hollow place beneath her sternum that pulsed every time the wind blew from the direction of his chambers. She had decided, 3 years ago, in the snow, without shoes, that she would survive the not caring better than she would survive the alternative. But the physician walked past again, and this time he was shaking his head, and the pulse beneath Lyanna's sternum became a pressure, and she knew, with the certainty that had always arrived in her body before it arrived in her mind, that something had changed. She picked up her bucket. She climbed 3 floors she was not supposed to climb, and she went to find the man who had told her, in front of his entire court, that she was nothing. The first time Lyanna understood what the mate bond actually was, she had been 17 years old and elbow-deep in sudsy water, washing the king's formal dining linens in the castle laundry. She had arrived at Valethorn Castle the previous winter as part of a general intake of servants from the border settlements. Girls whose families had offered them up in exchange for the pack's protection taxes being reduced. Lyanna's mother had cried. Her father had not looked at her. She had carried 1 bag and a blanket her grandmother had knitted, and had told herself it was an adventure, which was the kind of lie that only works when you are 16 and have never actually had an adventure. The castle was immense. It was built from black stone, quarried from the Valethorn Mountains, and in winter the halls held the cold like a second skin over everything, and the wind came through the window seams at night in a sound like breathing. Lyanna had learned her duties quickly. She was good at learning, good at keeping her head down, good at being unnoticed, and she had spent her first months moving through the castle like a shadow, learning the shape of the walls. She did not meet Aldrich for 6 months. When she did, it was an accident. She had been carrying a load of pressed linens to the upper residential corridor when she turned a corner too quickly and walked directly into a wall of warmth and solid presence, and the linens went everywhere, white cascading down like snow, and she stumbled and caught the wall and looked up. He was taller than she had imagined a person could be. Dark hair, pushed back from his face with the kind of carelessness that meant it had been pushed back 100 times that day. A jaw like something carved rather than grown. Eyes the precise gray of the mountains behind the castle in winter, and they were looking at her, not past her, not through her, looking directly at her with an expression she could not read. The bond hit her the way she imagined lightning hit the ground. Not slowly, not romantically. Like something that had been held in suspension, suddenly released, snapping through her chest and her hands and the back of her throat, and she understood, instantly and without any possibility of confusion, that she was looking at her mate. She also understood, instantly and without any possibility of confusion, that this was a catastrophic problem. He was the Alpha King of Valethorn. She was a border settlement girl who had been exchanged for a reduction in her father's debts. These were not two categories of person who shared a mate bond. The world did not work that way. Her world certainly did not work that way. She gathered the linens. Her hands shook, and she gathered them anyway. She said, "I apologize, sir," into the middle distance, because she could not look at him again and remain functional, and she went around him and walked the rest of the corridor with her spine very straight and her jaw very tight. She thought he would forget her by the next morning. He did not forget her. It started quietly. She would arrive to refresh the linens in a corridor and find it already done, which meant she had been rerouted there by the household steward for no clear reason. She would be assigned to serve at small council dinners, which was above her station. She would look up from her work in the East Garden and find him on the high balcony, not looking at her, looking at the mountains, but present in a way that felt deliberate. She tried to be sensible about it. The mate bond worked on both of them. She knew this from everything she had ever been taught. And he was the Alpha King, and Alphas were taught to master instinct. He would not act on it. The sensible thing, for both of them, was for her to remain invisible and for him to find a politically appropriate mate, and for the bond to become, over time, something they both carried quietly and separately. She was very committed to this plan for approximately 4 months. Then he sought her out in the library. The castle library was on the 3rd floor, and Liana was not supposed to be there during her off hours, but the librarian was an old woman named Merritt, who had never cared about rules she found inconvenient, and she had given Liana a key and told her to be quiet and return things where she found them. Liana had been reading there for 2 months, curled in the deep window seat behind the cartography shelves where no one ever went, when Aldrich found her. She heard him before she saw him, heavy, deliberate footsteps, and then a pause, and then the footsteps coming toward the cartography shelves with a certainty that meant he had known exactly where she was. He pulled back the shelf edge and looked at her. She had a book open on her knee, and her hair was half out of its braid, and she was aware, acutely and unhelpfully, that she was wearing her off-duty clothes, which were clean but plain and told the story of exactly who she was without any of the professional anonymity of her uniform. He sat down in the chair across from her. He did not speak immediately. The bond hummed between them like something warming. "You read the navigational surveys," he said finally. It was not a question. He had seen the page. "I find them easier to trust than maps," she said, before she could think better of it. "Maps are made by people who want to show you what they've decided. Surveys record what was actually there." He looked at her for a long moment. "That is an interesting way to think about truth," he said. They talked for an hour. He left without touching her. She sat for a long time afterward in the cooling window seat, her hand pressed flat against her sternum, and told herself she was managing the situation. She was not managing the situation. Over the following weeks, it became something she had no name for. Not a courtship, he was too careful for that, and she was too aware of the impossibility. But he found her in the library twice more, and once in the East Garden, and each time they talked. About books, about the pack's eastern borders, about a survey she had found that showed a river had moved 40 years ago in a way no one seemed to have recorded officially. He listened to her. He argued with her when he disagreed. He had the particular quality of stillness of someone who had learned to perform calm at all times, and underneath it, she could feel the bond warm and alive and pressing. She let herself want it for 3 months. Then came the announcement. He was to take a mate. It had been decided. The Silverfen Alpha's daughter, Mara, was the candidate. The match was politically necessary and had been arranged through the Pack Council. There was a betrothal ceremony planned for the new moon. Liana heard it in the laundry room from the cook's assistant, who was not being cruel, who was just talking, the way people talk when news is large. Liana finished the sheet she was folding. She folded it very carefully, with the corners perfectly aligned, and she set it on the stack, and she left the laundry room. She had almost reached the servants' stairs when he appeared. He came around the corner from the main corridor, and the bond ignited the way it always did, bright and immediate and unreasonable, and she stopped. "I need to tell you something," he said. She looked at him. His expression was the controlled, careful face she had come to understand as the face he wore when he was about to do something that cost him significantly. "I already know," she said. He stopped. "The betrothal," she said. "I heard it this morning. I think it is the right decision." Her voice was steady. She had no idea how her voice was steady. "I think we have both been. I think we were always going to have to be reasonable about this, and I will be." "Liana, I need to go," she said. "I have duties." She went. She cried exactly once, that night, in her small room in the East Wing, into the blanket her grandmother had knitted. She allowed herself the one night. She had learned, even then, to measure what she gave to things that could not change. What she had not predicted was that Mara's family would find out. She never knew exactly how it happened, whether someone had observed them in the library or whether the bond itself had been sensed by someone with enough pack sensitivity to read it. But 3 days before the betrothal ceremony, she was summoned to the Great Hall. Aldrich was there. Mara was there, composed and cold and beautiful, standing beside her father, the Silverfen Alpha, who had the kind of face that had not arranged itself into warmth in decades. The household staff had been assembled. The head steward stood at the front. Liana had no idea, walking in, what she was walking into. The Silverfen Alpha spoke. He spoke at length, and carefully, and with the particular deliberateness of a man, ensuring his words would be remembered. He described the situation as an entanglement. He described Liana as someone who had taken advantage of her proximity to the king. He used the word manipulative once and inappropriate attachment twice, and with every word, Liana felt the floor recede slightly beneath her, because none of it was untrue in any technical sense, and all of it was comprehensively wrong. She looked at Aldrich. He was looking at the far wall. He was not going to speak. She understood it in that moment with a terrible clarity. He was not going to speak, because speaking would end the alliance, and the pack needed the alliance. He was not going to speak, because he was the Alpha King, and she was a girl from a border settlement, and the political calculus was simply not in her favor. He was not going to speak, because whatever he felt, and the bond confirmed he felt something, even across the hall she could feel the turmoil of him, he had decided the feeling was something he could manage. The head steward stepped forward and told her, with professional neutrality, that she would be escorted from the castle grounds that evening. She was welcome to take her personal belongings. She would receive a letter of reference for her work record, which was not in question. She did not look at Aldrich again. She walked back out of the great hall with her head up, because she was not going to give the Silverfen Alpha the satisfaction of watching her break, and she went to her room, and she packed her one bag and the blanket her grandmother had knitted, and that night a guard escorted her to the castle gate in the snow, and the gate closed behind her. She walked for 2 days before a village took her in. The village was called Threnwick, and it was small enough that it did not care who she was or what her letter of reference said. There was a healer there, a woman named Sola, who was old and acerbic, and needed an assistant more than she needed the assistant to have qualifications. Liana learned to gather herbs in the highland meadows. She learned to prepare tinctures and poultices. She learned the properties of roots she had never touched in her life, and wound care and fever management, and the thousand small practical arts of keeping someone alive when sophisticated medicine was unavailable. She did not think about Aldrich. She thought about him every day, and she did not allow herself to dwell on it, which is not the same thing, but is the closest approximation available to someone carrying a mate bond she could not sever. He was there in the background of her awareness, the way the mountains were there in the background of the landscape, constant, significant, not something she looked directly at because there was work to do. A year passed. Mara's father died, and the Silverfen pack restructured, and the betrothal, she heard from traveling merchants, had been quietly dissolved. She heard this and felt the bond warm in her chest, like an ember catching air, and she pressed her hand flat over it and told herself firmly that it changed nothing. A man who stands still and watches you escorted into the snow is showing you who he is. She had learned from Sola that you trust what you observe, not what you hope. But the curse came, as curses do, without care for her plans. She heard about the curse of the Hollow Throne from a pack courier passing through Threnwick, who described it as if it were a political situation rather than a catastrophe. The ancient binding magic woven into the throne of Veilthorn, a protection spell placed by the pack's founders, tied to the Alpha's ability to shift and to the health of the bond between the Alpha and his chosen mate, had begun to unravel. The theory was that the throne required a true bond. Aldrich had never completed a mating. The magic had no anchor, and now it was pulling him apart from the inside, one faculty at a time, and every healer and every pack witch in the kingdom had tried and failed, and the king was dying by degrees. Liana went back to Threnwick's small herb garden after the courier left. She stood for a long time looking at the feverfew, which was coming up nicely that spring. She was not going back. She was not. She had built something here. She had learned things. She had a life that was quiet and dignified and did not require her to be in the same building as the man who had stood still and watched a door close on her. She stayed in Threnwick for another 8 months. Then Sola sat across from her at their small table one evening and said, "Girl, whatever it is, decide. You've been deciding it for 8 months, and it's making you gaunt." Liana looked at the healer. "He's dying. Men die," Sola said. "He's my mate." Sola was quiet for a moment. "Does he know what you can do?" Liana thought about the last year of her training, the things she had learned from Sola, that Sola had not taught anyone else, because no one else had stayed long enough and been curious enough and trusted enough. The particular combination of highland herbs and pack bond resonance that Sola had spent 40 years developing, the fact that the mate bond, properly worked with and not suppressed, could function as a channel for healing energy in ways that conventional pack medicine had stopped believing in 3 generations ago. "No," Liana said. "Then go tell him," said Sola. "Not because he deserves it, because you can." Liana came back to Veilthorn Castle not as a supplicant or a rescued exile, but as a woman who knew something useful. She had written ahead to the head steward, a different one now, the old man having retired, describing her training with Sola and the specific method she believed might address a curse tied to an unsatisfied pack bond. The new steward had replied carefully. The king had approved a meeting, through intermediaries. She had been given a pass and a room in the lower servant quarters, and nothing else. She did not ask for anything else. The castle was different. Colder, not climatically, but in the particular way of a place where the person at its center is diminished. The staff moved quietly. The fires were banked early. She walked the corridors she had once cleaned and felt the mate bond hum louder with every floor she climbed, urgent now, in a way it had never been, like something that knew it was running out of time. His study was on the 4th floor. The new steward met her outside the door and looked at her with careful professionalism that concealed, she thought, a fair amount of skepticism. "The king will see you," he said. "He has asked me to say, he knows this is significant, you're coming back. He is grateful." "I'm not here because I want gratitude," Liana said. "I'm here because it might work." The steward opened the door. Aldrich was seated by the window, and the sight of him hit her in the chest and drove the breath from her body in one quiet wave. He was thinner. The warm bronze that had always colored his skin had gone gray at the edges. His hands, resting on the arms of the chair, were still, the wrong kind of still, the stillness of someone who had stopped trusting their own body's movements. He had lost the wolf in him. She could feel its absence the way you can feel a missing tooth with your tongue, the shape of what should be there and is not. He turned to look at her. The bond, his side of it, which she could feel like a resonance through her own, detonated. Not gently, not with the managed, restrained quality it had always had when he worked carefully to keep himself controlled. Whatever control he had used to maintain his distance from it, the curse had eroded. The bond struck her full, warm, and enormous, and she felt his want and his grief and his shame in one undivided flood, and she stood with her hands at her sides and breathed and let it wash through her and recede. "Liana," he said. His voice was rough. The curse had been working on it. "I need to examine what the curse has done before I touch anything," she said. She crossed to the chair across from him and sat, and she took her small kit from her bag, and she opened it, and she was very professional and very deliberate, because if she allowed herself to feel everything that was currently available to feel, she would not be able to function. "Tell me when it began, and what the progression has been. Be specific," he told her. He was, she had always known, an extremely specific person. The curse had begun 18 months ago. First, the shift. He had woken one morning, and the wolf was simply not available, locked behind glass, visible, but unreachable. Then sensation in his extremities had begun to dull. Then warmth had gone from his hands. Not temperature, something deeper, the physiological warmth that pack alphas carry as a function of their bond energy. Now, the voice. Now the edges of his vision. She listened, and she prepared the first tincture, and she thought about what Sola had told her about the hollow throne curse specifically, that it was not a malicious working, but a foundational one. The throne required a true mate bond, because the founders had built pack sovereignty on the model of the completed bond, two halves generating something neither could generate alone. The curse was not punishment, it was absence. Like a circuit with a missing element, the energy had nowhere to ground, and so it was consuming the source. The conventional healers tried to treat the symptoms, she said. They were trying to plug holes. That's not how this works. The curse isn't pulling anything out of you. It's the absence of the bond completion, leaving your own energy with nowhere to go, so it burns back through you instead. What you need isn't medicine. He looked at her. In his gray eyes, behind the dulling and the exhaustion, and the controlled expression he had been wearing so long it was practically structural, she could see something raw. "What do I need?" "Me," she said, and then, because that was more honest than she had intended to be, she clarified. "The bond, properly activated, a completed mate bond, held open, not managed or suppressed. If I work with the bond as a channel and use the Highland compound Sola developed, the energy has somewhere to ground. It's not guaranteed, but it's the only mechanism that addresses the actual problem." He was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, the Veilthorn Mountains held their positions. "I stood still," he said. "When they sent you out, I stood still." She did not look up from the tincture she was measuring. "Yes. I have thought about it every day since. That doesn't surprise me, Liana. It doesn't change what happened," she said. "It doesn't change what I'm going to do here. I'm not here to renegotiate the past. I'm here because you are dying in a way that I can potentially stop, and because I have been trained for exactly this, and because—" She stopped. "Because?" he said, very quietly. She put the tincture down. She looked at him directly, the way she had been careful not to for the past 40 minutes. "Because the bond doesn't ask my permission," she said. "I have tried to manage it. I have tried very hard. It doesn't manage. And you dying would not solve that problem. It would simply leave me with the worst version of it." His jaw tightened. "That is more honesty than I deserve." "Probably," she agreed. "Now give me your hand." He extended his hand. She took it. The bond activated the way water activates dry earth, not explosively, but with a kind of total permeation, finding every place that had been parched and moving into it, and she felt him shudder, and catch himself, and shudder again, and she held his hand in both of hers, and she kept her eyes open, and her breathing even, and she worked. She worked for an hour that first day. She came back the second day, and the third. The tinctures were a framework. The Highland compounds created a physical channel that made the bond's movement more efficient, more directed. But the core of it was what it had always been, the pull between them, the recognition that had hit her in a corridor 3 years ago and never stopped being true. She let herself stop suppressing it. That was the actual medicine, letting it be real and open and unheld. On the 4th day, he got up from his chair and walked to the window without favoring either leg, which he had been doing for months. On the 6th day, when she arrived in the morning, his hands were warm again. On the 8th day, he caught her wrist as she was packing her kit to leave, and he held it carefully, the way someone holds something they have learned the value of, and he said, "Don't go yet." She looked at his hand around her wrist. She looked at him. "I know I have not earned the right to ask you that," he said. "I know exactly what I did and what I failed to do, and I am not asking you to forget it. I am asking 10 minutes. Sit with me for 10 minutes. She sat. He talked. He said things she suspected he had been organizing for months, possibly longer, and she let him say them without interrupting. He told her about the night she had been sent away, how he had stood in the great hall and calculated and chosen the pack over what he felt, and how he had believed, in the way of someone who has always had to be larger than his own feelings, that this was the correct choice and that he could live with it. He told her how badly that calculation had failed, not because the pack fell apart, it had not, but because the Hollow Throne had known the truth before he was willing to. The bond needed completion. He had denied the bond, and the denial had not been neutral. It had been corrosive. "I told myself I was protecting the pack," he said. "I think I was afraid. The bond. What I felt for you. It was not something I could manage, and I have always managed things. You were not manageable. You looked at me like you could see everything, and He stopped. His jaw moved. "I am not a man who has handled vulnerability well." She looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said, "you're not. I'm working on it. I noticed." They sat in the quiet for a moment, and the bond ran warm and steady between them, like a river that had finally found its proper course. "There is something I need to say to you," he said, "and I would like to say it now, while I still have the voice for it, before the treatment has fully worked and I convince myself I can manage this calmly again. He turned in his chair to face her completely, and the controlled, careful expression she had spent 3 years learning the underlayers of was simply absent. "I love you. I have loved you since a library window seat, and a conversation about navigational surveys, and probably before, if I am being completely honest, which I am trying to be. I love you, and I made the worst decision of my life when I stood still in that hall, and I will not stand still again." Liana's hand pressed flat against her sternum. The bond was warm and enormous, and certain. "Say something," he said. "Please." "I never stopped," she said, which was not the most eloquent sentence she had ever constructed, but was the most accurate one available. He reached across and took her face in both of his hands, which were warm now, properly warm, and he held her like that, just held her, looking at her face as if he were reading something he had been trying to read for a very long time. She felt the bond between them open the rest of the way, the last managed, suppressed portion of it releasing, and the warmth of it moved through her, from her chest to her hands, and she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, and they stayed like that while the mountains outside the window held their positions and the fire in the grate burned low. He kissed her with the careful deliberateness of someone who has finally stopped trying to be sensible about something. She kissed him back with the feeling of a person who spent 3 years learning not to want this and has now, with considerable relief, given up. It was slow and warm and thorough, and the bond completed around them like something settling into its proper architecture, and she felt the last of the curse's damage releasing in him like a knot unwinding, the absence filling, the circuit closing, the energy finding its ground. He pulled back enough to look at her. "Stay," he said. "You'll need another week of the Highland compound," she said, which was not the same as no. He recognized this. The corner of his mouth moved. "I'll need as long as it takes." "That's a long time," she said. "Yes," he agreed. Word reached the Pack Council before she had finished her second week. She was aware of it. The careful looks from household staff, the formal inquiry delivered to her through the new steward, the requirement that the king confirm the nature of their situation to the council's satisfaction. Aldrich received the council in his study, with the window open and the mountains visible behind him, and his voice fully returned, and he told them, with the particular flatness of tone he used when he was not negotiating, that Liana was his mate, that the bond was complete, and that this was a statement of fact and not a matter for deliberation. She heard about it afterward. The steward told her, with what she suspected was poorly suppressed satisfaction, that the council had taken approximately 3 minutes to formally ratify the acknowledgement, given that the hollow throne curse had visibly receded and the king was shifting again, his wolf, for the first time in 18 months, running free in the high meadow east of the castle, large and gray and very fast, unharmed and glorious. She went to the window and watched him come back across the field and thought about Sola, who was still in Threnwick, who would find this outcome entirely unsurprising and would probably say something acerbic about it when she sent the letter. The public moment came at the new moon gathering. It was not something Liana had requested or prepared for. Aldrich had not told her what he intended. She stood in the great hall, in a dress that the castle's seamstress had produced with quiet efficiency, deep green, well made, nothing that erased who she was, and she felt him before she heard him cross the hall. He stood before the assembled pack, and the council, and the staff, and the remaining guest delegation from the eastern borders, and he spoke without notes or preparation, in the clear, carrying voice that had returned to him over the past 10 days of healing. He told them the truth. Not a diplomatic version of it. The truth. He told them that Liana had come from the border settlements and had been dismissed from this castle 3 years ago in a decision he took and regretted, and that she had gone and built a life and become a healer of considerable skill, and that she had come back not because she needed anything from him, but because she had something he needed, and she was the kind of person who shows up anyway, even for someone who does not deserve it. He told them that the hollow throne was clear because of what she had done, and that he was standing before them as a functional alpha king for the same reason. He told them that she was his mate, acknowledged and claimed, and that anyone who found this insufficient was welcome to explain their objection directly to him. No one explained their objection. Lyanna stood in the green dress and felt the bond steady and complete in her chest, and when he turned and looked at her across the hall, she walked to him, not because he was the king, not because the mate bond demanded it, but because she had decided, 3 years of deciding, and now finally deciding this, that the wanting was allowed. That she did not have to keep the wanting at a distance to be safe. He took her hand, in front of all of them, in the exact spot where, 3 years ago, he had stood still. "How could I not love you?" he said, quietly, so that only she could hear it, "when you came back?" She looked up at him. The pulse beneath her sternum that had always been there, insistent and low, was warm and settled, not a second heartbeat anymore, but simply her own, larger now, making room for both of them. "You came back too," she said. "Just took you longer." He smiled then, fully, the way she had only ever seen once or twice in the library over navigational surveys. The warm, unguarded version that the controlled exterior had always been keeping safe. She had always known it was there. She thought about Sola's herb garden and the highland meadows, and the 2 days she had walked in the snow, and the night she had cried into her grandmother's blanket, and she thought, all of it had made her into someone who could do this, not the maid who had been sent out. Not the girl who had been exchanged for a reduction in her father's debts. Someone who had learned in 3 years of exile everything she needed to know to walk back through a door that had closed on her and do the one thing in the kingdom no one else could do. The curse of the hollow throne did not return. The pack felt it in the way packs feel things. Through the land, through the quality of the air in the high meadows, through the straightness of the mountains at dawn. Something had been set right that had been wrong, and the rightness of it spread outward from the castle in the particular way of a bond, well and truly completed. Lyanna stayed, not in the small room in the east servants' wing, in rooms that looked out at the mountains, where in the mornings she could watch the gray wolf run and come home, and in the evenings she could sit across from the man she had always known and talk about books and surveys and the nature of truth. She sent for Sola, eventually, and Sola came, acerbic and skeptical and quietly pleased, and took up residence in the castle's neglected healers' quarters and began rebuilding what had been allowed to fall away, and told Lyanna daily that she had done adequately, which from Sola was as close to celebration as the vocabulary allowed. The hollowness in the throne was gone, the hollowness in Lyanna, the one she had been managing for 3 years, the one shaped exactly like the bond she had refused to want, was gone too. Not filled exactly, completed. The way a survey fills in the shape of a landscape that was always there, not creating what didn't exist, but finally showing its true form. She was not the girl from the border settlements. She was not the maid who had been sent away. She was the woman who had come back, and the kingdom that had once refused to see her could see her clearly now, and what they saw was this: a queen who had earned her place not through blood or arrangement, but through knowledge and will, and the particular stubbornness of someone who shows up for people who have not yet figured out how to deserve her. And Aldrich, who had learned at considerable cost the difference between managing something and honoring it, did not stand still again.